Make it. Hey, Linda.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. Let's see. Let's get my video. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Ah.
Hi, Linda.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much, everybody, for reading. You're all so excellent. I'm really very grateful to all of you. So thank you.
Well, we've all been raving about your book and how much we enjoyed it.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear. This is the time right before it comes out where all the insecurities are like at their worst, where you think like no one's going to read it and no one's going to like it and it's going to just die in obscurity. So it's very nice to actually be reminded that it exists, that it's like a real thing. So thank you.
I definitely don't think it's going to die in obscurity and everybody's going to be raving about it. And in fact, I was on Goodreads earlier and you have such a great rating on there. So that's awesome.
Well, people have been nice. I think sometimes books hit differently at different times, and I think everybody like is sort of in the market for something happy at this point. So maybe that was a good time. It's definitely my happiest story of the three stories that I've written. It's the most sort of positive and uplifting. So I think that was probably good for these days.
Did you feel that as you were writing it, did you feel happier as you wrote? Did you feel like it was a happier story? How did all of that go?
So yeah, should I tell you kind of the story of how this came about? So okay, so I have two kids. I have a daughter who's 23 who graduated from college, and I have a son who's 20 who is now going back to college in a couple weeks. But when the pandemic hit, when it was March of 2020, my daughter was a junior in college, and my son was a senior in high school, and so I was living at home. I mean, my daughter had been in college for 3 years, and I was at home with my husband and my son and my dog, all of whom are men. And I was like living in this house of men, and it was fine, but it was starting to kind of get to me a little bit because, like it's nice to have, I missed the other female presence in my house. And then the pandemic hit, and my daughter came home, and she came home with her roommate because for various reasons, which I will not get into, her roommate really couldn't go home. So we had this young woman, like an extra daughter, staying with us for 6 months. And so it completely shifted the whole balance in my house of like this very male centered thing to like the women were sort of outnumbering the men, which doesn't sound like such a big deal, but it was also just the fact that like they were literally in college while they were in my house. So they were taking their classes, and they were they're really really, I mean, one is my daughter, so I can say it, but they're both like they're really brilliant girls, young women. And the conversation around the dinner table became much, it was elevated because they were telling us all about their classes, like they were in the middle of college. So it was a really different kind of conversation, and we started talking a lot about what, like all the issues they were facing, as young women in college and thinking about jobs and just everything. And we kind of just had much more philosophical discussions than we had before. And in fact, my daughter's name is Ellie, and her roommate's name is Adele. And Adele is at Cornell now getting a PhD in philosophy. So when I say our discussions
Whoa.
were philosophical, they really were. And at the same time, we were also binge watching Indian matchmaking. So these were sort of like the things that were going on in my house at that time. We're binge watching Indian matchmaking. We're all cracking up from Indian matchmaking, and we're talking about women and women's issues and like all of the like stuff that's hard about being a young woman in society today. So that was all happening. And then Adele, like maybe a couple months in, Adele says to me one day, my grandmother was an Orthodox Jewish matchmaker. And she pulls up this article on her phone because there had been a New York Times article written about her grandmother. And it was and there was a picture of her grandmother with all these filing cabinets. And her grandmother, that's what she did. Like it wasn't, I know a lot of people have watched like that show Unorthodox and stuff like that. It wasn't quite at that level, I don't think, but um she was like she was a real matchmaker. And so I had been working on another book at the time that I was halfway done with. But I don't know, I just kept thinking about that idea, and I had just sold my that book. So I had sold it when it was halfway done. I sold it like, I had a contract for it before it was finished. And then I called my agent and I said, I'm really thinking about writing a book about a matchmaker and a granddaughter. And I asked Adele, do you care if I write a book about a matchmaker? And she's like, no, go for it. But I didn't really know what it would be. But I just thought, I've never written anything like that before, but it sounds so fun. Like, and the book I was writing was very dark that I was working on at the time. And my agent said, wait a minute, just let me I want to call your editor and see what they think about this book, because we were kind of talking it through and I really like this idea. And then she called my editor and they said, oh, yes, like, let's do a 2-book deal, but we want you to write that matchmaking book first. We want that to be the first one. So I put the other book, aside, and I started the matchmaker book. And it really came out, it was the fastest I've ever written a book, because by the time I signed the contract for it, it was August and I hadn't even started the research. And I finished that book in April, which is really fast for me. Like, it takes me a year and a half to write a book, a year to write a book. I wrote that book from August to April, really even September to April. And it just it just poured right out really quickly. And the hardest thing about it really was deciding what the time period was going to be. Because in the beginning, I was thinking, should it be a 1950s? Should the grandmother be in the 1950s and the granddaughter be more modern? But then I started researching all kinds of things, and I found this newspaper article about the Pickle King guy, who we can talk about later, but that really inspired the story. And I realized, you know what? No, I need it to be earlier. I want this matchmaker to be in like the early 1900s. And I'll bring her up through the 1950s and past World War II and everything, but I wanted it to be an earlier kind of scene. And then, it just kind of all came together really quickly after that. So that's the story of how, that's the story of how and why I wrote it.
Well, and the nice thing about the 1990s is you don't have to worry about cell phones for the later one as well.
Yeah.
You can kind of.
And it's funny because I've never written anything contemporary, and I was really nervous about that. I was nervous that the Abby storyline would not hold up as well. And one of the things that I've been happiest about with the reviews is that people, dual timelines can be tricky. I've never written one before, and people have said that they really liked both of them. Like, that's been the prevailing comment about the dual timelines, which has made me feel really good, because I was really worried. For a while I was thinking, I'm just going to scrap the modern one. I'm just going to tell the editor that I just want it to be the older story. But I knew she wanted the modern story because she likes a modern story. And I really doubted my ability to do that, because my sweet spot is really historical, and there's just a richness to the language and to all of it that I feel like fits in with my writing. And writing the more modern part was hard, but once I started doing it, it was really nice, because that's when Abby's basically my age in this book. Like, I was a lawyer exactly when she was a lawyer. I was in law school when she was in law school. I was a young associate when she was a young associate. I worked in a trust and estates department, so I did work on some prenups. The prenup that she works on was inspired by this insane celebrity prenup that I worked on that was bonkers. That, and I made everyone a lot nicer in the book than they were in real life.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh my God, yeah, they were terrible. But so that one, it was fun because I knew it. I didn't have to research it. I just knew it. So.
Well, that was one of the first comments, actually. I think Kristen made it and a bunch of us seconded it her, was how much we liked both timelines, and that can be tricky in dual timeline, because sometimes you're wanting to get back to the one you like better, but then everybody was like, no, we liked both. And so it really makes for a much more enjoyable reading experience, but you did a great job balancing them.
Thanks. I'm so happy that people like the Abby part, because that was my fear. So.
Well, one of the things we were talking a little bit about was when Sarah and then subsequently Abby can kind of see this arc of light or whatever you want to call it that's connecting people. So, how did you come up with that as the idea for the connection? Because I was saying I'd seen a lot of reviews on Goodreads, people talking about magical realism. I didn't think it really kind of crossed the level of magical realism, but we had a big kind of conversation about that and, what it can be or can't be. And I just was curious, like how you decided to portray it, if that was hard, if that was instantly how you were going to do it, how all of that came about.
So I do love books with magical touches. I'm a big fairy tale person. I love fairy tales, and I love. I had actually I wrote a whole other book that was like a prequel to a fairy tale, a prequel to the Pinocchio story, which I'm still kind of working on, which maybe one day will be a book. But so I do love magical stuff. I love fantasy, not the like really heavy fantasy stuff, but I do love sort of whimsical things. I love Alice Hoffman's books, and those, several of those have magical realism or magical elements to them. So honestly, I'm not really sure how the thread of light came to me. I just was trying to figure out what was it going to be that was going to make her see. I knew that I wanted her to match her sister with someone. I knew that I wanted her. So I had this image of her coming on the boat to America, and I just knew there was going to be something. And at first I was kind of thinking of like a rainbow kind of like appearing overhead, and then that was kind of too big and too much and too, I don't know. I wanted something more subtle, something that other people wouldn't see. And so somehow, I don't know, the thread of light kind of came. And then, of course, with Abby, it's not really even a thread. It's just like flickers of light, somehow. Um, with Abby, I wanted something because I wanted it to really throw her off balance. So I wanted her to feel like she was seeing things. And like early on, there just was this idea of love at first sight. There's that kind of element, and everything with the optometrist and the sunglass, the glasses seller. I liked the idea of Sarah being sort of her vision not being great. And I don't know, there was just something about, I wanted it to be something that she saw as opposed to just something that she only felt in her gut. It had to be something physical that was more than that. And so I was when I was researching, I was just like poking around on procrastinating and poking around, and I found I was looking for pictures of pushcart salesmen, and I was trying to just get a visual, like trying to figure out how I was going to describe that and what that looked like. And somehow I came across like a picture of from a man selling glasses from a pushcart, and that like just sparked a lot of it in my head. But that visual element was important. So that's kind of how I got there, but I can't remember the exact like second that I thought of that, but that's sort of how it came about.
Well, we all really liked that and thought that was a fun way to do it. And we're just kind of curious how it had come about. And it sounds like, just as you described, it's very interesting and definitely such an interesting way to do it. If she's standing there and all of a sudden, this kind of connects two people, that it was just clever. And it was very, I think, very visual. You could see it as you were reading.
Yeah. I was trying to do that. But then I kind of like, I wrote myself into a little bit of a corner when I was thinking, well, it can't only be the people that she sees in front of her. So that's why there was there's a moment in the book where she's trying to match people when she says she's just going to do it, but she's going to do it in secret. And so I sort of tried to describe her sitting and like thinking of people and thinking of like constellations in her mind. And when they sort of lit up in her head, then she knew that they might match. Because as I got into it, I thought, well, that like she can't always have the people in front of her, that she thinks are going to match. So that's why I kind of came up with that sort of way that she could do it in her head too. But
yeah.
of course, the most fun parts are when she actually sees it.
But you're right, because she can't always have both people in front of her. A lot of times she'll
they
have
might
one of
not,
them,
right,
but
right.
right, but she won't
Right.
necessarily, there'll be a very limited group of people getting matched.
Yes, yeah, it would be, yeah, she would be, make one match, like, you know, in her lifetime. That would
Yeah,
be
exactly. Well, I know a couple people had questions, and after they asked theirs, anybody else who has them, feel free to hop in. But Michelle, you want to go first?
I just had a comment and a question. I paired this book with Jane Rosen's A Shoe Story, which never, I mean, it doesn't really say matchmaking, but there's an old Jewish man character that kind of acts as a matchmaker almost. And I realized after reading both books, I kind of felt similarly after I finished both of them. And I was wondering, like, in a perfect world, how would you like a reader to feel after they finished A Matchmaker's Gift?
I guess, I mean, I do feel, I hope they feel kind of hopeful. But the sort of feminist element became really important to me as I was writing it. The scene, the scene where the rabbis all, or not the rabbis, where all of the shadchanim, you know, bring her in front of the rabbinical court. That was a really important scene for me to write, and I felt like that was just such an important part of the book. So that feels important to me. That kind of idea that both of these women, Sarah and Abby, both, they're, even though they're not modern, Sarah's definitely not modern, there's that modern sensibility, there's that relevancy to all of our lives now, you know, as women, because of what we all have to kind of push through to have a career or have what we want in our life and feel fulfilled and feel purposeful. And that really came from sitting and talking to my daughter and her roommate at my kitchen table. So that was kind of like in my head and pushing the story in my head. And then the other part too, I really felt like I didn't want it to wrap up. I didn't want Abby to just be okay just because she found a man. You know, I didn't want that to be, but I did want there to be hope at the end. So the hopeful part, you know, I wanted that to be there. But I also really, as I was writing it and Sarah was getting older, I wanted there to be that sense too that she was opening herself up. And, you know, she wasn't just going to match. As her world expanded and she wasn't just living on the Lower East Side anymore, I wanted her to be able to match all kinds of people. You know, this idea that she was open and that her gift would expand to include everybody, not just, you know, the Jewish people that she knew that were just like her, but everybody. And that was important to me. And this whole idea too of just like having her gift have a darker side that she could sometimes sense when something was really wrong, when love turned dangerous or problematic, and she could help the woman that she helped. So it's a weird book just in that it's funny. When I wrote my first book, The Two Family House, I didn't know anything about writing books. I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about anything. And it got put up on Amazon and on Goodreads, and they said it was historical fiction. And I said, I guess it's historical fiction. But I didn't know that it was historical fiction, and I wasn't thinking I was writing historical fiction. I was just writing the story that I had been thinking about. And with this book, some people are saying or categorizing it as historical fiction, and some are categorizing it as romance. And maybe it has elements of both, but to me, it's just like, again, okay, it is whatever people want to say it is, but it's more important to me that people come away with just feeling what's in the story and not the category of it. So that kind of hopeful element, that inclusive element, that sort of strong female element, those are the things that I feel like I want to come out in the writing. And maybe that's really ambitious, and maybe people won't feel that, and some people are just be like, that was a sweet romance or whatever. and all of my grand aspirations are just, you know, not necessarily what some people will feel. But that would be my biggest wish for it.
Mission accomplished.
I'm sorry. Yes, exactly. We talked about that scene with her before the rabbinical court, but we also talked about the model and how, and I'm blanking on her name. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, but how you made her like a strong feminine character and kind of turn the stereotype of the model on its head. And we really liked that as well.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Because the prenup that I worked on, it was a model. and the guy was like 60 and he was an artist and maybe she was his muse. I don't know. And she was like 25 and I was like 25 and she was awful. And she put her feet up on the table in the conference room. And she wouldn't. And at the end, when it was all done, like I was there working until like 4 a.m. to finish this prenup. And the wedding, because of course they started it like 2 weeks before the wedding, right? And it was very complicated because he was an artist and it was crazy. And their wedding was on a Sunday, and I was there in the office with the partner on a Saturday. And when it was all done, she would not shake my hand. And her husband to be was like treating her like she was a child. She was behaving like a child. And he was like, her name was Mary. She was like, Mary, shake Lynda's hand and tell her thank you. And she just wouldn't. She just like turned away from me, just like a 5-year-old, and would not. So I really thought like I have to make this model much more interesting and much better, because the thing is like no one would if I wrote the character the way she actually was, people would say, well, that's not believable. No one could be that two-dimensional and that awful. But it's whenever you actually write something that's real, that's when people say this could never happen. Like, but she really was that terrible. So I'm glad that you liked the model that I made, because she was a lot better than the other one.
Well, I thought it was in keeping with your feminist message, you know, that you were trying to kind of promote women and this idea that it's always hard and, you know, that the obstacles that are faced. But back to the truth is stranger than fiction, you're literally like the 10th author to tell me that. And I think it's so funny, you know, that if you were to take something that really happened and put that into your story, everybody'd be like, no way. And instead you have to kind of temper it. I find that so funny.
Yeah, I think we all, a lot of writers who I know say that too. We all kind of say it because people are, you know, there's the whole like issue of the unlikable character, you know, and you can't, it's difficult for readers to cope with a character who's too unlikable. So you have to kind of you have to temper the truth sometimes.
I think that's definitely right. Well, Jada, I think you had a question as well.
Yes, I did. I'd love to learn about your writing process with the two timelines and how did you write them separately? Because they worked together and were so seamless in how they came together. So did you write one and then the other, or how did that go about?
So I had never done it before. And in general, I always write my books in the order that you read them. And I did the same thing here. So I do know people who write dual timeline books and they write one whole timeline and then another one, and then they just kind of, you know, weave them together. But I didn't do that. And I felt that I couldn't do that because I didn't know, it felt to me like if I did that, the transitions would be really weird. And so I also just really find as I write a book that just things keep popping up and layers keep inserting themselves into the story. So if I wrote one whole thing and then another whole timeline, I just feel like that would have been lost. So I did work on them just the same, you know, the order that you read it is the order that I wrote it. It was hard, I have to say. This was, even though I wrote it really quickly, in a lot of ways it was mentally more challenging than writing my other books because it really was like two stories. So there were so many elements that I had to keep remembering. And I'm a little bit of an outliner. Like I knew where I wanted it to go, but I don't outline in great detail. So I kind of keep it all in my head. So my head was a little hurting.
Very full.
Yeah, it was full. It was full, but this story was a really wonderful escape for me during the pandemic because, you know, it was a really crummy time. It was a crummy time for everybody. And certainly people who had very young kids were exhausted from schooling them at home and everything. There was a particular kind of sadness having kids the ages that my kids were because my son lost his senior spring. My daughter couldn't go back to college junior, senior for her senior year at all. And there was a lot of just like achy sadness, that I felt for them because they couldn't get that time back. And I would just want to cry all the time, even when I think about it now. It just made me so, I just ached for them. And so at night, when I would go to sleep, instead of like feeling sad and thinking about all of that, I would just sort of like dream about Sarah and Abby. I literally every night I would close my eyes and just like put myself in that world. And that helped me like, oh, it helped me sleep because otherwise I think I just would have been up so much of the time just like really worrying about them. So it was a
What,
good
what happened to the book that you were halfway through with?
Oh, so I tried to go back to that, but I'm going to save that for another day. I've kind of shelved that because as I was finishing this book, when I was done with this book, I enjoyed writing it so much and I enjoyed having that little touch of magical something, whether we call it magical real, whatever we're going to call it. And I also really enjoyed writing an uplifting book. So I decided I was going to do it again. I don't know if I'll do it a third time, but the next book is definitely more in that vein. And so my husband's great grandmother was a pharmacist, which is kind of unusual for someone. She graduated from pharmacy school in 1921. And I've always been really fascinated by the stories that they tell about her, that my mother-in-law tells about her. And so and then I just like the idea, I don't know, I just got in my head that I love the idea of like a pharmacist and maybe like a love potion and maybe like some magical chicken soup and different things. So the next book has those things in it. But also like an old, like last summer, not this summer, but last summer, I moved my dad into assisted living and there were all these hysterical characters, like when I was moving him to his assisted living place. So there's like that whole kind of like 80-year-old person in a retirement home in Florida kind of element too. So it's kind of funny. It's got two timelines, but they're both the same person. So it's a person when she's young and when she's older. She basically meets like the love of her, re-meets the one who broke her heart when she's like 80 years old in a retirement thing in Florida. But it goes back to her youth and stuff like that. So it's fun. And I've been doing like researching on like, I don't know, ancient love magic and stuff, like trying to find if there's any like interesting elements or interesting things. I found a couple there are a lot of weird things that you can find. So it's fun. But I also just really like the setting of a pharmacy in the early 20th century. So I was reading a lot of memoir type stories. Pharmacies were so strange back then because they were everything. Like the pharmacist was like, your doctor, and they did everything for people. And there was a night bell, they lived above the pharmacy usually, and people would like ring the bell in the middle of the night for stuff. And I don't know, it's just an interesting kind of setting. So that's where that story's going.
I was just going to say that about pharmacists, because that's changed so much, the role of pharmacists. So that will be interesting, kind of how they began. What did your editor say? Did you just go back and say, I really don't want to write this dark story right now? Can I write this other one instead as my second book?
So yeah, I mean, I did. Publishers generally are very happy. The easiest thing for them is if you kind of have a brand, right? If there's like if we think about the really most popular authors, like somebody like an Ellen Hildebrand, right? Like brand is in her name even, but like, she writes Sir Nantucket, the Nantucket summer books, right? So, and I think a lot of publishers love that because it's a sure thing and they know what they're getting, and you can build readers and you can build that for sort of overall success. So I don't think I can ever do that. I don't think I can ever be so similar time and time and time again, because I'm always coming up with different things, and it's just not in my nature to do that. But I did have this feeling after I wrote this book that I that I wanted to explore that part of my writing again. So she was really happy about that. And we'll see, you know, the other book, there's parts of the other book that I can save for something else. I don't know. I have like probably 3 half books that I have not ever gotten, you know, that I've never finished because something comes up or whatever it is. It doesn't end up working out. But that's okay. It's sort of part of the process.
Oh, absolutely. And you're probably able to use at least portions of those at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to, I have a bunch more questions, but I want to make sure everybody else, if anybody else has questions, they ask. Does anybody else? Okay, Kristen.
Hi, Lynda. How are you? My question is, will you be going on tour in person for this book?
Yes. I remember meeting you before. You came to Chappaqua. You're so sweet.
Yes, I was telling everybody.
I wanted to cry when I met you because you came up to me and that was my first book. And I was like, oh my God, a person that I don't know came to see me. I was so touched. Seriously, you were the very first.
I was telling everybody that. Yep.
I was so touched. Yeah, I'm going to be back at the Chappaqua Library.
Oh, I might come up to it.
Yeah. On the 21st of September, I'm going to be there. But yeah, I'm doing a bunch of things. I have a few things on my website, but the website isn't complete. But I have somebody making like a graphic for me of all. I think I have like 30 things in the between now and December. Some of them are virtual, so a bunch are virtual, but I'm going to Michigan and Indiana and South Carolina and the Morristown Book Festival and the Miami Book Festival and a bunch of different things. So, but I'll have that up pretty soon and I'll post it on Instagram and everything. And so, but come to Chappaqua. It'll be fun. I like being at my hometown library. It's always fun.
Oh, good. All right. I'll try.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, well, if you change your mind, just let me know. So I know you have a group of sorry to say lawyers because we're talking about lawyers, a group of authors that you get together with weekly, or is it weekly or monthly?
Weekly. I mean,
weekly. That's
over the summer. Yeah, over the summer we've been, everybody's been busy, but for the whole first 2 years of the pandemic, every Thursday we Zoomed together. And that
I thought I remembered that.
Yeah.
So do you all work on your work together, or do you more just talk about things or talk about the publishing world? Like, what does that group look like for you?
So we don't work together. It's not like a workshop kind of thing. So we don't, not as a whole. Like I have read a bunch of people's things from that group, whether it be a chapter or it be a whole book or whatever it is. We talk, but when we get together on our Thursday Zooms, it's more just like support and like what's everybody working on and what's everybody's news and what's everybody's grievances and like what are everyone's questions and what's going wrong and what's going right and what's the tea, as the kids say. But then we're all just friends separately too, we're all friends. So I'll, like I said, different people, I think we all have different strengths. So depending on, if somebody's stuck in their writing, they might send somebody else chapters or pages or whatever it is. I had like a long phone call with one of them about a plot point that was having, that was problematic. And yeah, so we all have our different strengths and weaknesses, and we work as a whole, but then separately too. But it's not a writing group. It's more like a group of authors, just a support. It's more of a support group. So because I think some people have more formal writing groups where like everybody has to read everybody's stuff and comment and whatever, and it's not like that.
Okay. Yeah, no, sorry. So just going in here. I figured it wasn't, but I thought it's probably so nice to have that group in terms of just talking. There's so much mystery, I think, about the publishing world and what's happening and when, and to just be able to have that type of support is probably so nice.
It's so important because it's a very strange business.
Right.
It's a very strange business. And I don't know if any of you guys have been following like the trial, like the whole merger trial in the news, but if you read any of the stuff about that, you see like it's a very it's not a transparent business at all. So there are, and sometimes for very good reason, but it's really hard as an author to know if you're doing well. Like we unless, I mean, there are the obvious markers if you hit the New York Times bestseller list, if you hit the USA Today list. But like a lot of what we talk about is like, is this okay? Like this happened, is this okay? My editor said this, is this okay? My agent said this, is this okay? Because nobody, we don't really know, and we don't have colleagues in an office, and publishing is just very opaque. It's just very closed mouthed. So a lot of it is just kind of keeping ourselves from, getting too worried about things. So.
Well, and at least several of you are with different publishing houses. So that's really nice too, just to hear, I think, what's happening at each house, and kind of how things are being handled. That's probably fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And it's just very reassuring because, like one of my author friends in that group is Fiona Davis, and Fiona Davis is a New York Times bestseller, and like that was really thrilling for us because that happened during the pandemic. That happened with her Lions book, and we were also excited for her. But like, so if she says, well, no, this is what happened to me in this time, and then this happened, it's very reassuring, right? Because, and it's also just reassuring for all of us, no matter who tells what, because we know like we're not alone, and we know that this is how it works, because nobody knows how it works. I don't mean to be cryptic, but it really is like this strangely cryptic industry, and nobody likes to talk about money, and nobody likes to talk about numbers, and you have to really push for information. It's very strange. My husband doesn't understand it at all. He thinks it's the craziest thing he's ever heard. And then you get a royalty statement, and my husband is a lawyer, and he does like very complex financial litigation. So he sees like spreadsheets and things, like he can't even read the royalty statement. And he's like, if I cannot read this royalty, who could read it? I don't know what it means. Who is making this thing up? So it's really hard to figure out.
It is, and it's just so crazy, and it's hard to tell, like why certain people are doing it one way or certain people are getting this. It just seems to be such a crazy system. And I don't know. And with respect to the lawsuit, that's, so funny. I have that behind the scenes series that I do once a month. And so I reached out to somebody today regarding that, which had to do with like whatever his role is, which is a book's like the book reps that sell to independent bookstores. And he's like, okay, but I can't talk about the lawsuit. And I was like, what would I ask him about the law? But I was like, okay, no problem. But they must be telling all the Penguin Random House people they cannot talk. I mean, they must have to say, just so you know, I can't talk about it, which I thought was so fascinating, because I was like, well, I would have never dreamt to ask him about it,
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a crazy.
I'll be very curious to see how it plays out.
Me too. Yeah, definitely.
Well, what about writing about New York City? Because we talked about how that was fascinating to read about those time periods in New York, and a different area of New York than you sometimes read about. So was that so much fun writing those parts of the book?
So much fun. Yeah. The only thing that was sad about it was I couldn't really go, because I was researching that early on in 2020, like in, that first summer, and I really wasn't going to go into the city. But there was a lot online, and the museum at Eldridge Street website was really helpful, and the Tenement Museum and the Jewish Museum. But I wanted to try to capture that era. And there were so many interesting real things that I found. The whole story about the Pickle King and his daughter's wedding was just amazing to me. And the Kinnish War was a real thing that happened. And one thing that was funny, so again, it goes back to like, it's always the real things that people have issues with. So I have a friend who is a pretty religious Jewish person, and I am Jewish, but I'm not religious. But so she knows Yiddish, and she read some of the Yiddish for me to make sure that it was right. And as did my daughter's roommate, actually. So I had two people like checking my Yiddish phrases. But my friend is a writer also. And she read the whole book for me. And she gave me a couple notes. And one of the notes both two notes were about those two things that really happened, saying that they wouldn't happen. So she read it and she said, okay, I just have some notes. Like, first of all, there is no way that the New York Times would have reported on some immigrant wedding in the Lower East Side. Like, that just wouldn't happen. And I was like, well, actually,
Like,
and then I said,
yeah.
and then she said, and this whole thing with the Knish, the competing Knish stores, like the rabbis in the community would have prevented competition and they would have done this and this and it never would have happened. And I was like, well, here you go again, because this actually was the thing that happened. So it was just really funny that's just always what happens. It's always what happens. The things that you think are not real are real. So, but it was a very fun thing. And I found this photograph, which I love, which I could, can I
Yeah.
share my
Do
screen?
I have to, I'm always so bad with this. Do I have to let you share?
Yeah.
Is that?
I think you have to make me like a
Yeah, I think so too. Let me
share it.
Okay, I just made you a co-host.
Okay,
Wait,
so
I just,
now I have to find this picture. I'll show you some of the
I
pictures.
think I made you a co-host. Yes. Oh, I made Kristen a co-host. Okay, let's see. Sorry, Kristen. All right. Make Lynda a co-host. All right.
So, all right. Can you see my crazy screen full of all kinds of junk? Or
No.
Okay, so hold on.
Yeah.
All right, so
Trying to see if there's something I'm supposed to do, but I don't. I don't have an option. It just says, yeah, I don't have an option.
yeah, it doesn't
Make you a host, but then I guess that messes me up.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna try, here's what I'm gonna try to do. I'm gonna try to take a picture of it on my phone and hold it up. I don't know if that will work, but it's just, you can't, it's not even so much that you can see, but I don't know if you'll be able to see this if I hold this up. But it's a picture of people praying on the Williamsburg Bridge, and they're participating in this ceremony called Tashlich, which happens at the Jewish New Year, when you're supposed to like write your sins down on a piece of paper and throw them into water. And so I found this picture of people doing that on the Williamsburg Bridge in the early 1900s, and it was just such a fascinating image to me, that the idea that these people would be on this bridge, and it's just like, so I put that into the book. But there were a lot of things like that really cemented this image of New York City at that time in my head. And I found it just really, I don't know, inspiring, just sort of, I don't know, it just filled me up inside just to think about what that time period must have been like. So that was it was a lot of fun to do that. And it was really special. So I hope, with my first book, I did an event at the museum at Eldred Street. I'm trying to see if I can work something out to go back there again, because that's on the Lower East Side, and I'd love to do something there and talk to people there about the story. So that'd be a lot of fun. So we'll see.
Well, you know, and I remember when Susie did her event with Untapped New York, that would be another good one for you, you know, where they do like kind of showing some of the area of the city and everything. That would be fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I started following them when she did that event. I started following them, and I love all the stuff they send now. So
I have to look into that one.
Yeah, she probably has a good contact. So good. Well, anybody else have any questions? Okay, Melody, did we just catch you on the wrong time zone, or were you just running late?
Oh, it's my husband's birthday.
Oh, okay, good. I thought, oh no,
Yeah.
I hope it wasn't, I messed up the time
Did
zone.
I catch you at the very end, or do you have more?
Well, we were just actually finishing up one question. Do you have any questions you want to ask now that you're here?
I'm like, not even ready. I should pass on. I was thoroughly entertained. And I guess I wonder, I read your author's note, which was really interesting. Have you done more homework on like matchmakers in general? Like, I guess I always thought they were women because of Fiddler on the Roof, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, these days, I spoke with a modern day matchmaker now, like, which was interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I was really surprised about that too, that they were so often men, and it helped me a lot in the story. Like I liked that detail because it gave my character something to fight against. So it was actually like a really good find. Um, but the matchmakers, I don't know. I guess I didn't find it as I spoke to some modern matchmakers, but I didn't find it really so helpful for the story. Um, I was looking for, I don't know, just like interesting tidbits, or I don't know what I was looking for. It's sort of like it's like that a lot when I try to interview people. I don't really know what I'm looking for until I find it. Although one of them did tell me I did learn about the idea of a charm from her, of the segula from her, and this idea that there are like these charms or things that or rituals to bring people luck. So there was a reference in the book to wearing like the bride's jewelry at a wedding, and that's something that's supposed to make you, you know, maybe give you luck to have a better match yourself. So I put that in there. So that I didn't know about. I had never heard that word. I had never heard of that concept. I didn't know that that even like existed at all. So that was kind of interesting. But other than that, it wasn't so helpful to talk to the modern matchmakers. Um, it was fun to watch the Indian matchmaking show on Netflix, though. That was a lot of fun.
I'm gonna have to go watch that show now. I think there was
Yeah.
somebody from Houston that was on that maybe, and I can't remember. And there was some drama
Maybe. I
related
don't
to
know.
her.
There's a second season now. They just came
Okay.
out with the second season, but I haven't watched the second season yet. Yeah. But but there's a lot of similarities, you know, because it's that kind of, it's a very old world kind of idea, right? Like hiring somebody else and just doing this. And I don't know, it's very, very interesting. So whether it's Indian or Jewish or whatever culture it is, the idea that it happens and that you're trying to pair people and not necessarily based on love, but on other things, hoping that they're just going to settle into love. And so that, you know, it's a really interesting concept. Like there's a lot of ways to go with it, with the matchmaking book. You know, there are so many different paths you could take.
We did talk a lot about that, or a little bit about it before you came on, in terms of what it would be like to be matched and that whole idea. And, you know, somebody that you hardly know, or, you know, what if you didn't get along with them? Just, it's such a foreign concept, I think, to most of us, or all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I've never been, I don't know if any of you guys have like been to like a fortune teller or something, or have someone read your tarot cards or whatever. I've never done any of that because I'm always like a little bit nervous that they're going to look and, you know, like make a terrible face and be like, oh, and I'm like, walk away. I can't talk to you about what I've seen, or, you know, something, I don't know. It makes me nervous. So I've never done it. So it was kind of, like it was a little bit funny. I was sort of amusing myself with the idea that I was writing about a matchmaker who just saw things, because I personally, I think I could never handle going to one or anything like that. I think it would just, I'm too afraid.
Yeah, ever since I read The Immortalists, you know, where they learn their death date or whatever, and then it's all, you know, all hell breaks loose for all of them. I'm like, okay, I don't think I can do that.
Yeah. And there's that new book, The Measure, right?
Yeah,
Which is a similar idea where everybody gets like a string or something.
right.
Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't read that one yet either. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a little afraid of reading that one.
Yeah.
There is a really fun book though. Hannah Orenstein, who is a younger writer, wrote a book and it came out in July called Meant to Be Mine. And we're doing a couple events together. And in the fall. And so her story, I love the setup of it. Her story is there's a grandmother, and this woman knows the date that everybody will meet their soulmate. And so for the people in her family, she knows their date. It just comes to her. And so the story opens with the main character who's like in her, you know, mid 20s, and it's her day. So she knows that she's supposed, and it's worked for everyone in the family. So she knows that she's supposed to meet the person that day. And it's like, how does she act in that day, and who is she meeting, and like everyone, you know, she's actually at the airport, and she's like looking all around, like who is it? And it's a great setup. So
That does sound like fun. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you would definitely be on high alert if that was you.
Yeah, it'd be terrible.
Well, anybody else have anything before we go?
You want to take
Lynda.
pictures? I'm usually the one to remind you. Did you?
Oh,
wanna-
yes, I would love to get a photo. Thank you, actually. And I'm trying to remember, is it shift command, F command? Just give me 1 second. No. I'm,
Space.
what is it again? I don't know why I'm having
I
trouble.
can just take a screenshot for you, Cindy, if you want.
If you would do that, that'd be great, because
Sure.
I've got my book.
All right.
I don't know.
Everyone smile. 3, 2, 1. Got it.
I don't know why I cannot remember. Is it, what is the on a Mac, the screenshot? Does anybody know?
I have it posted under
I never know how to do
because
it.
I can never remember it.
Command Shift 4, maybe?
Command Shift 4. Okay. Do I
Oh
have
yeah, but then you have to like make the
Yeah, then you have to draw
Yeah.
it.
yeah.
Oh, it's Command Shift 3. Okay, great. Okay. Will y'all just really quickly smile again? I'm sorry. Thank you. I've brain fart. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you. I never can remember that. Good. Well, thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Lynda, thank you so much for joining us. This was so much
Thank you all
fun.
for reading.
Thank you.
And I've seen like some of you posting reviews and stuff, and thank you so much for that. It's so sweet, and I'm just very grateful to all of you. So thank you, and thanks, Cindy, for suggesting this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad.
It's going to be a huge success.
It's going to be
Definitely.
great. I'm so happy.
That's
It's going to
good.
be really good.
It definitely is. So thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Of course. All right. Bye,
All right,
guys.
bye.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you,
Cindy.
Cindy.
Of course. Oh, I can't.
Thanks, Cindy.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good evening.
Yeah.
Bye.